So I think we're probably hitting enough that we're close to a quorum to get started. And I think we've fixed our problem with the pop-ups when people are admitted. So that should not be an issue today. And I think we can probably get going. What do you think, Kathy?
Sure, that sounds great. Well, I'm Kathy Wigand. I'm one of your co-hosts. The other co-host is Jordan West. Jordan, you want to wave? So there we go. I am a research ecologist with the US EPA in Narragansett, and Jordan is a senior ecologist with the EPA in DC. So we are very fortunate to have Tim Watkins to kick off day 2 of our workshop. Tim brings broad and extensive management experience from across different ORD programs. Let me put the slides on so we can all. Sorry about that. I was so excited to introduce Tim. I didn't put up any slides. So they should be coming up. Terrific. So welcome back to the workshop. And as I was saying, we are fortunate to have Tim to kick off day 2 with some opening remarks. And Tim hails from the Office of Research and Development. His experience includes leadership roles in the Air, Climate, and Energy Program, the Environmental Public Health Program, and Human Exposure and Atmospheric Sciences. As a result, he brings a unique and valuable skill set and perspective to his current role as Acting Director of the Sustainable and Healthy Communities Program. Tim, thanks so much for being here, and over to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome to everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor to be able to provide opening remarks for day 2 of this workshop on resilient coastal wetlands and resilient coastal communities. Today's workshop will continue the exploration of the evolving concepts of climate change, vulnerability, socio-ecological impacts, and the priority adaptation practices that are required to manage for resilient coastal wetlands and communities. We know that coastal wetlands are a critical environmental component of community resilience because of the beneficial ecosystem services that they provide. One such service, which is the ability to protect adjacent upland areas by mitigating the impacts of storms and floods resulting from climate change, is of growing interest and importance to communities that are facing these extreme events of even greater frequency and intensity, especially when we have man-made barriers that are too costly or perhaps less desirable for ecological or social reasons. Other ecosystem services such as water for purification, the provision of fish and wildlife habitats, carbon sequestration are also of great value to community and regional stakeholders. As you learned yesterday, the Sustainable and Healthy Communities Research Program is committed to helping communities build resilience in their socio-ecological systems that will optimize health and well-being outcomes. This includes a commitment to development of tools, methods, and frameworks to support healthy and resilient ecological and human communities. Within the SHC program, as we call it, within our community-driven solutions research area, one of the focuses is on development of guidance for effective resiliency actions. And within this area, we work closely with partners and stakeholders as they use the best available science to develop effective plans to increase communities' resilience to climate change, land use activities, and other rapidly changing environmental conditions. Key to this are the close partnerships that we have with communities and local organizations that are essential to this endeavor. The EPA research efforts that you heard about yesterday have been carried out collaboratively with key partners in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast regions. And today you get the opportunity to hear from panelists from a variety of other organizations and partners who are engaged in a rich array of research and application activities with their own communities and partners across these regions. These partner panels will further expand and enhance our discussion with additional exciting and novel research approaches, across the 3 thematic areas of this workshop, which are to characterize and measure coastal wetlands resilience, to adapting management to enhance wetland resilience, and linking resilient wetlands to health and resilience of coastal communities. In addition to hearing from the panelists, today will also culminate in an interactive discussions, information sharing, and feedback among the participants of the workshop, where we can explore commonalities and differences in our approaches, areas of success and opportunities for improvements, and other insights that have been gained from the various methods that have been applied across the regions and across different practitioners. We hope that the collective efforts of this 2-day workshop will bring us closer to our shared goal of leveraging knowledge and lessons learned from across the regions and organizations to help standardize, improve, and advance methods to support resilient coastal wetlands and communities. So with that said, I will thank you for your time in advance and for your participation today, and wish you the best and hope you enjoy the workshop. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to make opening remarks. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tim, for those opening remarks. So first, I'd like to go over the overall goal of the workshop. And here we're trying to leverage knowledge and lessons learned from across regions and organizations to help standardize, improve, and advance methods to support our resilient coastal wetlands and communities. So the workshop spanned 2 days. Yesterday, we heard some talks from some EPA researchers and collaborators of the US EPA, some from the University of Rhode Island, and some speakers from EPA Region 1. A main part of the workshop yesterday was the participation of the audience and the participants in the workshop. So there was a lot of interactive discussion, which we'll talk about more as I proceed in this discussion. And today, as I said, we'll have this interactive discussion, but another aspect of today is some direct talks from some of our partners on the ground who work in our wetlands and in our communities. And it's really rare to bring together partners who are doing this on the ground work into a workshop like this. So I'm very excited to hear from our partners. And I know some people have been asking how we'll use the feedback and the content of all these presentations that have been given over the course of the workshop. And we're planning to create a workshop proceedings that will be shared with everyone. And in that proceedings, we'll try to summarize the talks, lessons learned, and really try to pull together what we learned in that interactive discussion portion of the workshop. So yesterday, during those interactive discussions, it was really interesting to hear from the participants on various topics. We discussed the meaning of resilience, so what resilience meant to the folks participating in the workshop. We got a diversity of answers, and as I said, we'll share all those responses in the workshop proceedings. We talked about how resilience figures into wetlands management and adaptation work. And of course, we're going to continue to cover that topic today during the panelist talks. We talked about and discussed important indicators of resilience, value gained from stakeholder engagement, and we just touched on environmental justice and areas for improvement. And we hope to talk more about that today. And finally, with the audience, we discussed the connection between wetland and community resilience. And these are all topics that we'll revisit today during the workshop. Before I proceed further, I'd like to introduce some really important people on our team. And the first 2 people I will introduce are our wonderful facilitators. That is Joe Siegel and Joan Johnson. Joe and Joan, do you mind popping on to the screen to say hello?
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe and Joan. And we also have a wonderful support team, which helps to make this a very seamless workshop. So they're doing a lot of behind the scene technical work, and thank goodness for that. And those folks are Adriana Burke, Anna Hamilton, and Jen Stamp. Do you mind just popping onto the screen to say hello? Thanks so much to our wonderful support team. Jordan and I really appreciate everyone's help. So to make this a successful workshop and to hear all the wonderful input from the participants, we've been using different features of this virtual app. The first feature we're using is the chat, and you can find the chat somewhere on your screen. Mine is up in the topper tool area and just says chat, and you click on it. And in that chat section, you can ask questions of either our technical support team, if you're having any technical questions. If you could please put a T before your question, that would help us. If you have a question for one of the speakers, you could put a Q. And if you're so inclined, you could also put the name of the person that you would like to direct your question if it's a specific question for a specific person. And last, if you have just a general comment, you could just have a C precede your comment. The other aspect that we're using to get feedback from the participants is a really neat website called menti.com. And I'm frozen on my screen, but yeah, I'm back. Okay, menti.com. And if you put that into your Google or some other app where you can reach the internet, so it's www.menti.com. So if it's possible to have that open on your phone or a second computer screen, or you can toggle between the two windows on your one computer screen if you don't have a phone or a second screen. And if you enter that code, if you enter that site and put in the code 923145598, you will be able to see the survey questions that we will ask throughout the workshop. And then you can answer those questions. And as we go along, we'll have people guiding you about those survey questions. And in real time, you can see the results of those polls. So it's a really neat and fun aspect of the workshop if you're able to participate in it. So the workshop has three general themes. And I think Tim touched on these. The first theme is what is wetland resilience? And we'll revisit that theme today, and we touched on it yesterday. Some of the aspects of wetland resilience we will cover is how to define, characterize, and measure resilience, the relationship of resilience to vulnerability and threats and impacts, and how to assess vulnerability and the socio-ecological impacts. Our second theme is how do we manage for resilience under a changing environmental condition. So some of the areas we'll touch, and many of these we'll cover today in some of the partner talks, and that includes selecting priority sites, evaluation, prioritization, and design of interventions, and socio-ecological trade-offs in our decision-making. And the third theme that we began to speak about yesterday and we'll cover again today and again in some of our partner talks is how can resilient wetlands boost the health and resilience of coastal communities. And here we've been talking about and we'll continue to talk about coastal protection, such as flood abatement, human health, and other valued ecosystem services, such as fish and wildlife habitat. And yesterday, we also talked about carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas abatement. So at this point, we have our first Menti question of the day. And what we'd like to survey is how these themes play into your focus in either your research or application. And we're going to have Joe, one of our facilitators, actually talk more about how how he will poll you using that menti.com. So over to Joe.
Thank you, Kathy. We have a couple of quick questions as we jump into the Menti polls, just to explore the kind of work that you're doing. And here's the first one. We are going to have two polls. You may decide to reply to one or both. The first one is for wetland experts, if you think of yourself as an expert. And then the second one is going to be for people who are decision making and stakeholders. So you can answer one or both. Just want to let you know that there's another one coming if you don't think of yourself as a wetland expert. So let's start with this first poll. And we're seeing there's three different questions to answer, and we're seeing some gradual changes. Only 9 people so far, so let's give it a minute. And just to remind folks that really important to get into Menti. If you weren't here yesterday, you'll see, so as Kathy mentioned, go to menti.com. It's at the top of the screen. Punch in that code either in your phone or another screen, and you'll be able to jump in, because so much of what we'll be doing will be to collect information from you, which will be very helpful to the proceedings for the output. So looks like we're seeing, when we think about this continuum, probably how to manage wetlands to increase resilience under changing environmental conditions is pretty much the top one for wetlands experts in terms of their work, amount of work. A little less than that is how to characterize and identify vulnerable and resilient wetlands, but very, very close. And yeah, it looks like it's pretty much staying in that area as people are continuing. So it looks like a little bit less on the how resilient wetlands can boost the health and resilience of coastal communities, but still a fair number of people do work on that. Adriana, do you think we should perhaps move over to the next slide? And again, this is for decision makers and stakeholders. Same question. If you're an expert, you may also consider yourself a stakeholder and decision maker, and you can answer this one as well. Give you a few seconds to get started on that. Right.
So Joe, if I could just chime in for a second.
Please.
Since this is a continuum of research to application, if you spend all your time on research, you would be over to the left of the slide of the slider. If you only do application and you're not really on the research side, you'd be to the right. And if you're in the center, that means you're really spending about half your time on the science part and about half your time being involved in application.
Thank you, Jordan, for that clarification. Give you a little more time to put in your responses. To about a third of the people, and looking like how to manage wetlands to increase resilience under changing environmental conditions, more toward application. So I guess, Jordan, 2.5 would be the middle point. So, right. So if we're to the left of 2.5, then it's more toward the research side.
Right.
But what we're seeing is for all of them so far, more toward the application, as we saw in the last slide. And but particularly with how to manage wetlands to increase resilience under changing environmental conditions. another couple seconds.
It's interesting though, Joe, because for the third one, the way that's colored in with the curve, that implies that even though the mean is 3.3, we really have a big spread of people. Some who really do work all the way on the research side, some that really work all the way on the application side, but the mean is more toward the middle. So as opposed to the top two curves where people seem to be spending more time on the application side. Or in this case, for our stakeholders, we're asking how much importance do they place on our investment in that.
Right.
So that's really interesting. Thank you, participants.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I think we're probably ready to move on. And
Okay, so this one is a little bit different type of question than everyone else has. Whoops, did it not?
I think Adriana, that Kathy has a slide before we move on to the next Menti.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let me put that slide up for everyone. Okay, those were really interesting results. The means were similar, but it looks like the spread across the different parts, the different aspects varied between the wetland experts and the stakeholders and decision makers. That was really interesting. So the next slide that I wanted to touch on was some of the challenges that people talked about yesterday that they face when addressing resilient wetlands and resilient communities. And the topics and challenges started with capacity building. So that was one. These aren't in any specific order, but we talked about capacity building for improved management of wetland and coastal community resilience. There was interest in working with stakeholders and human-centered design. There was some attention to translating scientific information for decision makers and barriers and opportunities for successful implementation of management actions. And a lot of these topics will be covered today. And one of the last areas and topics of interest were dealing with uncertainty. So now we're going to try another survey poll. So we're going to look at the interest versus experience in these topics among our participants. So over to Joe again.
okay, and thanks, Kathy. And Adriana's going to put up the poll, which will measure. You'll see you have a continuum there. Let's see, wait for this to come up. Yeah.
So, so for this question, there's going to be a slide for each of these 5 topics. You're going to rate for 1 to 5 for your experience and your interest. So this one, folks should take a little bit more time to think about so that we can see for these topics where your interest is and where your experience is. And it might be that you have interest and experience in both for some and not for the others. So take your time. This one's a little bit more in-depth question, but we appreciate your interest and experience and your participation in this one. Kathy, you're on mute if you wanted to chime in.
Thanks, Adriana. I just wanted to point out that on the slide, for those of you just joining us, or for those of you who haven't had a chance, the menti.com website is at the top of the slide with the code that you'll need to enter in order to take part in the polls. Thanks, Adriana.
Yeah, and so if you are just joining us, you'll see for this Menti, for each element, capacity building, working with stakeholders, et cetera, you'll be making 2 choices. one for your experience and one for your interest level. And we're seeing so far that pretty high level of interest and experience for most of these parameters. With capacity building, it's a little bit higher on the interest than on the experience. And with the barriers and opportunities for successful implementation, it's kind of mid-ground on the experience, but pretty high on the interest. Give it another few moments because this one takes a bit of time.
It's interesting at this point, we have very high interest and also experience in translating scientific information for decisions. That's really impressive. It's good to see that we have those people in the audience.
I guess that suggests we have a lot of researchers and scientists, perhaps, in the group. Not sure, but that one seems to be remaining pretty constant in that very high level of experience and interest. Looks like things are slowing down, but just to sort of tie it off, it does appear that pretty high level of interest on capacity building, but not quite as much as experience as in the others, with barriers and opportunities for successful implementation. Looks like it's, again, pretty high on the interest, but sort of in the middle to the lower end of experience, but very much in the middle, as with dealing with uncertainty and working with stakeholders. Also, pretty high level of interest, but kind of in the middle in terms of the level of experience. All right. I think this is a good time to kind of turn it over now to Jordan. But first, I want to just say, as Jordan's going to start the next segment, which will be listening to the speakers, just to give you a heads up that as you're listening to speakers, you can put your questions and comments in the chat. We will be handling questions through the chat, and Joan will be monitoring those questions. And then we'll have some time for Q&A after the first two speakers. And anything else you wanted to say, Kathy, to close this out before we move on to Jordan?
Sure, Joe. I think I'll just mention that we're moving forward, like Joe had mentioned, into the panel talks. And we have two regions where we have asked some partners to come and speak to us and share some of their successes and challenges so that we can all learn from each other. So there's a Mid-Atlantic partner group as well as a Northeast partner panel. The Mid-Atlantic group, they will talk about resilient coastal wetland benefits, research and partnerships, and we will also have a talk on decision-making and tools for implementing resilience interventions. After lunch, we'll have our Northeast panel talk, and one speaker will talk about implementing salt marsh adaptation and restoration actions, and the second will talk about, well, actually, it's a group of talks. We'll talk about building resilient wetlands and communities. So under each of the blue highlighted topics, there will be 2 talks each. So in each regional section, there will be 4 speakers. So we'll have 4 Mid-Atlantic speakers and 4 from the Northeast. After each pair of talks, there'll be a 10-minute question answer session.